Welcome to our movie recap channel, your ultimate destination for in-depth and engaging movie summaries, whether you're looking to catch up on the latest blockbusters or revisit classic films.
The show begins in Berlin, Germany. John Fontanelli, a bicycle courier, conveys packages and dispatches to make ends meet. One day at work, he gets a request to convey a package to an obscure location, but John refuses, citing that it's his off hours and heads home.
Later, an elderly man presenting himself as an air tracker shows up at his door. He claims that John might be the intended beneficiary of a large estate. The elderly man gives him €2,000 in exchange for his spit for a DNA check and asks him not to work while his inheritance claim is settled. At first, John thinks the elderly man is just a crackpot since he's a vagrant with no family or relatives to inherit anything from. However, he decides to cooperate as the elderly man is paying him generously for his trouble. That night, John heads to a friend's club and spends all the money. At midnight, his friends wish him a very happy 25th birthday. John parties along with his friends and drinks all night. His brother, Leno, visits him at the club and gives him his first tie. The scene shifts to the next afternoon. John and his friends are wasted after the party in a state of a hangover. He gets a call from the same old man who insists he get things together quickly. Our hero is confused, but he decides to come. Minutes later, the elderly man shows up at the doorstep and urges John to live with him. Marvin, John's best friend, is concerned about the elderly man. He playfully tells John that he might be kidnapped or killed. However, John dismisses him and says that he might give it a chance since he has nothing to lose. Not long after, he's whisked away on a private flight to Florence and escorted by heavy security. In Florence, he's greeted by Sir Vacchi and his granddaughter, Franco Vacchi, the scions of the largest house in the city. Sirvi's family has been working in Florence as lawyers and asset managers for ages. John insists that there's been a misunderstanding and that they have the wrong person. However, Sir Vacchi explains that John is a descendant of Giacomo Fontanelli, an influential man who lived centuries ago. Fontanelli has left a will stating that his entire fortune would go to his youngest male relative. This revelation makes John the heir to the world's richest inheritance. However, this wealth comes with certain rules and tasks that John must use to benefit society. Sir Vacchi reveals that Fontanelli had a prophecy about 500 years into the future, envisioning a world devoid of hope. In his dreams, he also encountered a god who advised him to pass all his wealth to his youngest male relative on the 500th anniversary of his dream, which just happens to be on John's 25th birthday. This male heir would be responsible for restoring hope to people. John also discovers that there are two in line after him, Kenji Takahashi and Luke Fontanelli. He eventually accepts his inheritance after coming to terms with the fact that he is now the richest man in the world. Franco Vacchi instructs him to stay in the mansion until the will is read the next day. John is escorted to an office where he's granted citizenship of Italy. Later, Franco's uncle Gregorio Vacchi visits John when he is preparing dinner in his private kitchen. Gregorio talks about his family business and their influence worldwide. However, he is completely different from the rest of his family, since he believes money is the utmost necessity that can solve everything. The next morning, he takes John to the hill for a little hike. During this time, Michaela, a woman working in security, approaches John in private and tells him that the Vacchis are not revealing everything to him. She reveals an accident that occurred in the same place, which the Vacchi tried to cover up. She insists John meet her the next day at the same spot. They soon return to the mansion while John remains puzzled by what he just heard. Curious, our hero escapes early in the morning on a motorcycle and reaches the spot. He climbs down the cliff with the help of a rope and finds a crashed vehicle. Inside it, he discovers an ID named Lorenzo Fontanelli. Suddenly, Michaela appears at the scene riding a bicycle. She claims to be the sister of Lorenzo Fontanelli, the last person expected to inherit the $1 trillion fortune. She also reveals that she saved her life by changing her identity, but unfortunately, she couldn't save her brother. She believes the Vacchis are behind it and that they are trying to acquire the wealth of the Fontanelli family. John is stunned by the revelation, but is determined to find out the truth. Michaela then asks him to give her the names of the successors after him. John only remembers Kenji Kashi from Osaka, who is 3 days older than him. Suddenly, Michaela attacks him from the back, injecting him with a substance. John soon blacks out while Michaela talks on the phone with someone, confirming that their target is down. She also informs them about Kenji Takahashi. Meanwhile, Michaela has lied about her identity and is actually working for someone who is disposing of the family members to control the fortune.
John later wakes up in a rundown apartment that is used as a secret base by Michaela's people as he's tied to a chair.
A man scans his full face and body. They're attempting to make a fake video of John committing suicide by stepping onto train tracks.
As the video is uploaded to the social media platform, Michaela covers his face with a bag and leaves the room. John cries and begs her not to leave.
Suddenly, he hears a disturbance nearby and someone uncovers his face. He then sees Michaela dead right in front of him. It turns out that John's security has found him using a location tracker and killed most of the enemy's men.
Not long after, he is safely escorted back to the house. John later expresses his frustration with Sci-fi for hiring a woman who worked with the enemy.
He also blames him for not informing him about Lorenzo's accident.
Sci-fi meets with John privately and tells him that the kidnapping demonstrates that those who want him dead have the means and willingness to act.
Having had enough, John, on Vicky's advice, decides to renounce the inheritance in exchange for $10 million. He reasons that $1 trillion is useless if he isn't alive to spend it.
However, on Franco's advice, John later changes his mind. He agrees to accept the inheritance after she explains that he has a responsibility to use the money to serve others.
Having experienced life without honor and moving between foster families, John understands the struggles of not having enough.
Franco insists that no one is more suited to handle this responsibility than him. He could save the lives of millions of people living in poverty. John shares the sentiment and decides to accept the inheritance.
After the will is read, John becomes the owner of all the Jomo's wealth, but it is up to him to decide how to use the money to help. He is assigned a group of advisors who can guide him on where and how to spend the fortune. Meanwhile, Franco is sent home by her grandfather for encouraging John to accept the inheritance and violating her oath of neutrality.
It just so happens, Sci-fi has been trying to influence John since he arrived in Florence. The elderly man wants someone else to inherit the wealth, fearing John would squander it. His first choice is Kenji Takahashi, whom he considers a much better candidate. Takahashi, an elite university graduate, is more educated and knowledgeable about how the world functions. The scene then shifts to Paris, France. We see Luke retrieving a package from his mailbox when suddenly, a man in a black hoodie signals him to get inside. Luke, also a descendant of Giacomo Fontanelli, and next in line to inherit the fortune after John and Taka, is informed by the men that someone named Sear has instructed him to travel to the Philippines immediately. Upon hearing Sear's name, Luke agrees and departs the vehicle. Meanwhile, John returns to Berlin and meets with his brother Leno. Both are surprised by John's newly discovered fortune. That evening, John goes to a club and recklessly spends money, throwing cash at the clubgoers. The next morning, news breaks about him being a bike courier who has suddenly become the world's richest man. The headlines highlight John's irresponsible behavior, and the Avakis are forced to attend a press conference in Florence, where they are questioned about John's ability to manage the Fontanelli ventures. The media also probes whether the Trillionaire is capable of saving the world and fulfilling the prophecy his ancestors believed in. The Avakis remain mostly silent, insisting they do not want to comment on the matter for now. Meanwhile, John decides to return to Florence after his scandal. At the airport, Luke sees the news about John taking control of the Fontanelli fortune and is visibly angry. As it turns out, Luke was approached by influential men who support his claim to the legacy. They hope to exploit his inheritance for their own gain, such as rigging elections and engaging in other unethical activities. However, due to John's visibility, the entire world now knows about his $1 trillion inheritance, making Luke useless to these men. They now want him dead. Luke misses his plane and returns to Zaya's place, seeking an explanation. She had promised to help him secure the legacy, but she does not answer the door, leaving him even more frustrated. Suddenly, Luke spots the same body that picked him up the day before and gets inside. One of the men hands him a phone with Zia calling. Luke questions her about how a bike courier like John could fulfill the prophecy. Zia insists he stay quiet and lay low for a while, then warns him that the men are ordered to kill him by some powerful people. She advises him to head to Algeria instead of Manila and to leave as soon as she hangs up. Luke follows her advice, but also kills the two men before escaping. Meanwhile, John sits in a meeting with a council of experts where they discuss emerging world problems like job loss, poverty, and climate change.
As the experts debate solutions, John is overwhelmed by the realization that he now needs to save the world with his wealth.
After the meeting, Gregorio decides John needs to relax, so they head to the seaside. Excited, John leaves important papers unattended and scattered on the floor. In the next scene, Heir returns to his granddaughter Franca and tries to reconcile with her. He reveals that he has finally finished reading her thesis on the power of financial change processes. He believes Franca is the only one who can influence John and guide him onto the right path. However, when Heir later sees John's scattered papers, his doubts about John's capabilities reignite. The old man painstakingly collects the papers and heads to the underground vault to keep them safe. Unfortunately, Heir's frail health gives out, and he suffers a heart attack. While this is happening, John and Gregorio are busy celebrating at the seaside. 4 days later, John receives mail from an anonymous sender.
Inside the package, he finds Franca's thesis, which has impressively outlined how the world should operate.
In Franca's voiceover, we learn that the Avakis are a family of lawyers and notaries who had been aiding the elites of Florence in accumulating wealth for generations. The Avakis have also made a vow of neutrality, meaning they refrain from meddling in matters unrelated to them. Franca, born into the same family, harbors different aspirations.
Instead of collaborating with the elite, she aims to assist those in need.
When she learned about Giacomo's legacy, she saw an opportunity to make a significant impact on the world. Thus, she developed a thesis outlining how the legacy could be utilized for the greater good.
That afternoon, John attends Heir's funeral and tries to talk to Franca. She learns that her grandfather sent her thesis to John just before his death.
John asks her to help him save the world with his legacy. Franca had already realized that even if John were to channel the entire legacy, it wouldn't necessarily change global problems.
The issues were systemic and required a more comprehensive approach. Simply giving large amounts of money to impoverished countries would likely only fill the pockets of corrupt politicians. To truly enact change on a global scale, John needed to exert control over the world economy and the flow of money.
It was this realization that inspired her activist hedge fund concept, an intricate and industrial plan to manage key businesses worldwide. Initially, she had abandoned the idea when Heir advised her that John must develop his own solutions.
But when she learned that her grandfather, in his final moments, recognized the potential of her plan and sent her thesis to John, Franca decides that she needs to implement her strategy.
Thus, she agrees to help John. Promptly, John purchases a deserted power plant and transforms it into his headquarters. Franca then recruits numerous employees, including John's friends, providing them all with the necessary resources to assist those in need. Among the recruited is Malcolm McCain, renowned as one of the best and most idiosyncratic hedge fund managers globally.
To streamline, Franca explains to John that Malcolm is the person you'd approach to manipulate the stock market, provided you had the financial means to do so.
The scene briefly cuts to Luke arriving at a deserted location in Algeria.
Back at headquarters, John and Franca have their first official meeting with the experts. Malcolm chairs the meetings and explains how the financial markets work. With $1 trillion at his disposal, John could acquire almost anything, including a majority stake in corporate giants like Amazon.
However, such a move would immediately deplete his resources. For instance, gaining a majority stake in Amazon would require $800 billion, leaving John with only $200 billion of his $1 trillion legacy.
Malcolm plans to expand John's image beyond that of the world's wealthiest individual and transform him into a globally recognized brand once synonymous with trust, respect, and leadership. To achieve this vision, Malcolm reveals that he has assembled a team of talented professionals across various fields, including technology, marketing, accounting, research, and more. Their initial strategy involves using climate change as a rallying point to attract activists' attention.
They take advantage of the ensuing commotion to strategically infiltrate the board of ABM Electric, one of the largest energy companies worldwide. In the following scenes, John attends various meetings and conferences, attracting the attention of the masses with his speech on giving back to society. With just a 3.7% stake, John and his team successfully secured half of the board members from ABM Electric, as the world watched and admired John's philanthropic endeavors and his commitment to giving back.
Meanwhile, Luke harbored deep resentment towards John, feeling that John had usurped his rightful destiny. Luke had spent his life feeling like a wayward orphan and vagabond until he met Heir, who convinced him that he was destined for greatness.
However, his aspirations were thwarted when John was chosen as the primary successor to the Fontanelli fortune.
Driven by bitterness and a sense of injustice, Luke left Algeria and traveled to Berlin with plans to confront John.
At the same time, John and his team were busy celebrating their recent success.
Leno, John's brother who had cared for him since their parents' deaths, arrived at the celebration visibly concerned.
He expressed his worries about the safety of his daughter and wife, especially now that John had become a prominent figure. Leno explained that he had been followed for some time and that neighbors wanted his family to move away, fearing that someone might target them. Suddenly, Luke appeared, gun in hand, and declared that John was unfit to inherit the Fontanelli fortune. John's security team reacted swiftly, pulling him away and urging him to get inside the vehicle. A crossfire erupted between the two sides.
Tragically, Leno was shot in the stomach while trying to protect his brother. The final scene showed a devastated John holding the lifeless body of his brother.